Tanshi Kiwa. Hello, how are you all? Welcome to Homelands, originally broadcast on CFCR Community Radio 90.5 FM in Saskatchewan Homelands of the Métis and Treaty 6 Territory, CFCR.ca. This is your favorite Auntie Andrea Letting Dishne Kashun. My name is Andrea Letting. Call me Auntie Andy if you like, and I'll be your host over this next half hour. I am part settler, part relative, and 100% ally in relation to everyone. I'm just me, not a card-carrying member of any Indigenous nation, but I am loved, adopted, related to, and accepted by many. Rejected by a few. Haters gonna hate, relators gonna relate. I am blessed to have Indigenous relations in my family and secretly may love them a little bit more than all the rest, only because they're the first peoples of this land who welcome all the guests. I also have some Irish and Scandinavian along with a little bit of mystery, and that's the way I was raised, strongly decolonial and justice oriented with a big related heart for all. I most empathize with my Batoche Métis friends and family and that history and culture growing up, and as an adult I've continued to try to live that meal permits when that beautiful good life. So from the fringes of the stash, I situate myself as a relative and an ally and welcome you, my listeners, as brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, cousins in the homeland. So let's welcome our relative tonight. So I am very excited to welcome the Solomon Ratt. So and he's very well known, and he was born on the banks of the Churchill River and spent the first 6 years of his life with his parents living the traditional lifeways of the Cree. In winter evenings, his parents would tell the traditional stories, which he loved. When he was taken away to residential school, he no longer heard those stories. He became re-familiar with the stories during his high school years and through university. Solomon has been teaching classes on the Cree traditional stories for 30 years. He's an associate professor at the First Nations University of Canada, where he has taught for 35 years and was also named to the Saskatchewan Order of Merit in 2021, but a very, very well-known, very respected, loved, appreciated language keeper and story keeper. And I'm very, very honored to welcome you here. And I turn it over to you, to Solomon, to tell us, whatever you want, whatever stories you want, whatever, wisdom you'd like to impart.
I should say that in TH dialect now. Thank you and greetings to all of you. I'm Solomon Ratt. It's going to go to the Bunyan, go swing to the Bunyan, and to put the Higoin. Do I make Chigian? I may have it's going to do the It's the banana, he could tell you. Be began like the banana. You come on, I was Syrian. Nigiachi Mustagman. The Nigawak, Niga, we have demanded Gagiachi Mustagwak or Hotel with Saki Sakachimoina. That too, typical. May I misspoil the Managagiachi Mustagwak or Hotel Yachaloka, or Hotel Kusaki Achalokimina. He goes, man, he gave me look, Tin agony. He gave me the man, the best man. You got my Yagagi with the Higo and the ocean, the march we said, and he picked in Yagana Achimoina. With us, my Gapi Bookman up, Bukagi. Achalokijik. Negi, he will come in a tag. In the work, Cap Bookman up, Bukagi Achalokijik. You got that piece among Managagia, Sklamat, Gamigo, September, no G2 piece, more Square, Pascal, piece. No much is that Negi, 15 man, what I actually see when they take again, Mr. Gian. So I was 6 years old when I got taken away to residential school. And we lived on the banks of the Churchill River, my parents and I. And we spent our time traveling up and down Churchill River. And when winter time came around, once the snow started falling, my parents, especially my mother, would tell us the sacred stories, the traditional stories of our people, especially Wissahichak stories. This character named Wissahichak. She'd tell us those stories. And so every winter we'd hear these stories, the same stories, and we'd hear them and we'd get to know these stories at that time. And but when I was 6, I got taken away to residential school in Prince Albert. And from that moment on, I did not hear these stories anymore. Because wintertime was time for storytelling, and I was away from home from September until June every year. But every year, come June, at the end of June, we'd go home to Stanley Mission. And and I tried getting my parents to tell me stories when it was summertime. You got to get the young man, hey, no matter what, that's look at I got any big gate to man. And they told me, oh, we don't tell legends. We don't tell these stories in the summertime. So we had that situation. I couldn't hear these stories anymore. And we spoke nothing but Cree at home. You know, my parents didn't speak a word of English. So this is one of the reasons why I retained my language. Is because when I went home in the summertime, we spoke Cree all the time. But my parents upheld the tradition of telling stories in the winter, but not in the summertime. And so I didn't get to hear these stories. But I got to learn to read, and I got to learn to love the libraries. And I sought out these stories in the libraries. And you know, when I was grade 5, I was encouraged to be a reader, and so I sought out these stories. And Ella Clark, Indian Legends of Canada, I found that in the library, and I picked it out and took it out of the library, and I read a couple of stories. I read some of these stories that are in Ella Clark's Indian Legends of Canada about Wissahichak. These are the stories I used to hear on the trapline, but it was so different. You know, Ella Clark had cleaned up the stories a lot. You know, there was a story of Wissahichak and the creation of the world. There were stories of Wissahichak and the flood, and these were cleaned up a lot for the Christian audience, I guess. And I was sort of happy to find these stories, but I was sort of disappointed too that the writer had cleaned up these stories, had modified these stories somewhat from what I'm used to. So, but I was happy to hear these stories. That was in grade 5 and go through high school and stuff, and I kept looking for other stories. And I finally went to university in Regina in 1973. It was the University of Saskatchewan Regina campus at that time in 1973. And of course I sought out the library. And there I found 2 treasures that I really, really, really was happy to find. There was a 1929 edition of Folklore, American Folklore, Journal of American Folklore, 1929 edition, where Reverend Edward Ahenicu published Cree trickster tales. And all the stories, most of the stories I was told when I was a kid are in that collection of 1929 collection. And I was so happy to hear these. The drawback was all of these stories were in English. But I was happy to read them in English because I could translate it into Cree anyway, so that's no problem on my part. And I kept looking, and I found Leonard Bloomfield's Sacred Stories of the Sweetgrass Cree. Now there was this edition, this collection of stories, of traditional stories in Cree and in English. And it was so fun to read the Cree. I was just learning to read Cree at that time too, because I was part of my classes. And but I'd laugh, you know. I'd read the Cree, and then read the Cree through, and then I'd read the English translation. All of a sudden, I'd run into the English translation with a ... Something had been deleted in the translation of the story. So I went back to the Cree part, and I read that part again. Nothing was deleted in the Cree part. You know, like that's really, really super that the Cree part, the story in Cree was intact in Cree, where the English translation was edited somewhat, and it was just just a brief example. I hope your audience will forgive me for this, but there's a story about Wisakija coming upon the startlers and tricking them to reveal their sacred name. And so in Leonard Bloomfield, it says, "Bosh, you guys are startlers. You guys you're too small to startle anybody." And he immediately ... And he went on his way laughing. Well, what is that ... about? So I went back to the Cree part, and it says, and the translator, and there he shat on the little birds' heads and went on his way. That is totally in Cree. Is there? Same story to Edward Hennique. And it convinces, in Edward Hennique's version, he convinces the startlers to reveal their name, sacred name. And as soon as the startlers reveal their sacred name, Wisakija picked up the little birds and put mud on their faces. That's how Hennique dealt with that a little bit. And so this is the kind of situation that you run into. You get into a lot of traditional stories coming into play, and a lot of them gets edited and stuff. But there's a big interest.
Mm.
There's a big interest in traditional stories. One of the most recent stories that came out is Pixies at the Uganda, Sacred Stories of the Pixies people. And there are some wonderful stories in there that are traditional to the area. And there's this one, Sacred Stories of the Sweetgrass Cree, that I was talking about. And this is in Cree and in English. Mm-hmm. And we have all sorts of other things. We have this, my book. Here we have the story of the starters I was talking about, complete in its naughty language. It's really neat. And this is what we have to contend with in our storytelling sessions. Like a lot of the storytellers get invited to elementary schools and high schools, right? And I was telling a story like this without editing the stories at all. And I was telling a story about the big skunk going around farting on people to death. And I do that to elementary. I tell that story to elementary school students, and the big skunk backed up toward the stump, and they let one go, boom, and they let them fart, and the kids were laughing. They just absolutely enjoyed the story of the big skunk going around killing people, and that animals had to work together to defeat the big skunk. Well, as it turned out, the kids loved it, right? And they went home and they told their parents about this storyteller who came to talk about the big skunk killing people and other animals in the forest, and they let go with his farts. Well, some of the parents got a hold of the school board and told them that it should not be allowed in the schools. So I never did get invited back to that elementary school. What do you do, right?
I mean, that literally stinks.
Yeah, that just stinks, man. But that's the thing, though. I love telling these stories, and so do other people. And the situation today is, I went to this language festival one time, and one of the people I really respect, an elder, was having stories, a storytelling session with the students with the elementary school students. So I went, and she's telling stories to the kids. And I know she speaks Cree very well. She's a fluent speaker in Cree. That's her first language. And so I'm sitting in the back, listening to her, enjoying the stories, but she's telling them all in English. So she was done, and I stayed behind to talk to her a little bit. And I asked her, why did you do that? Why did you speak in English all the way through without going to Cree? And she said, well, like children wouldn't understand the Cree anyway, so I thought I'd tell them in English. That's one of the obstacles we have to overcome. You know, we have storytellers going around all over in Saskatchewan for Storytelling Month. And I'd love to see those stories being told in the traditional languages, but I don't think that'll be the situation. I'm going to try to tell the stories in Cree and in English. And I wish my colleagues would go ahead and do their stories, like my colleague, Soto colleague, she can speak Soto and Cree. She probably will do the same thing, but that's only two of us that'll tell these stories in our original languages, unfortunately. So what does these stories, why is it so important to tell these stories? You know, before there were schools, before there was any kind of schooling in our world, in our Cree world, children learned how to live in this world. In the summertime, the boys would be with their parents, with their fathers, and doing all the stuff that they need to do to survive. And the girls would be with their parents, with their mother. And they'd learn to do the things that they needed to survive. And so that's how they were taught during the summertime. In the wintertime, both boys and girls would listen to the stories of the traditional stories we have of Wisakichak. You know, this character, Wisakichak, is known as a trickster. You know, he goes around tricking people all the time, tricking people being animals, of course, too, also tricking animals. And he's a mischievous character. But he's also very curious. And through these stories, children are educated on how to be in this world, how to live in this world, without the benefit of schooling. You know, without the benefit of schooling, we were taught how to live in this world. We were taught how to live with the other animals of this world. We were taught how to raise children. We were taught how to be spouses with our partners, what our responsibilities were. All these lessons were in the stories, which were told every winter. Once the children got taken away from their parents to go to residential schools, that education system stopped. We were no longer taught those things. We no longer heard those things. We were in a foreign world at the residential school. We didn't know what was going on most of the time, you know. So, and because of that situation, a lot of us grew up not knowing how to be parents. A lot of us grew up not knowing how to be partners in a relationship, because we weren't taught these things in a residential school. These were things taught to us in our stories. So it is no wonder that a lot of us ended up with broken marriages. It's no wonder that a lot of children are taken away to care homes nowadays, you know, because those stories helped us build a community. They helped us build a family stronger. And that's how strong these stories were, and how important it is to bring these stories back. You know, I'd love to see schools making stories, traditional stories, as part of the curriculum. Not as just something you do come February, storytelling month. Let's have some stories here. Hey, man. You know, it should be every day. It should be part of the curriculum in every day school day. You know, I'd also love to turn on the radio sometime and hear, oh, it's storytelling time. It's 7 o'clock Monday evening when nothing else happens in Canada. But today we will have sacred stories from such and such, you know, for a whole hour of sacred storytelling on a radio program or TV program, you know, and bring these stories back, encouraging to using the language in the storytelling. I'd love to see that. There are more and more people telling stories nowadays, and more people publishing stories. And unfortunately, most of the people who are doing the publishing are non-Indigenous. You know, this book here, the Pixies stories, this is a Pixies publication. This was the stories were originally written by Eleanor Brass in the 1980s. And I spent 2 years ago, I helped out with translations of these stories. So they are now in English and in Cree. with me doing half the translations and Daryl Chakamis and Ina's Dieter doing the rest of the translations in Cree, and I edited the whole bit. So we have Cree and English versions of these stories, and they're, like I say, most of the works are in English and are most in English. Very rare to find anything that's in Cree and in English, but we'll see more of that. I'm sure we will, because there are more people willing to write in Cree, and I hate to say it, most of the stories that have been saved have been those done by ethnologists, non-Indigenous ethnologists and anthropologists. Without those stories, we might not even have any access to the stories anymore. A lot of people would have forgotten about the stories without the stories that people like Leonard Bloomfield and Edward Hennicu collected. In Cree, anyway, I can only speak of Cree. So I know. But I have hope for these stories. A lot of people are interested in them, because there's so many lessons that we miss when we don't tell these stories.
Yeah, storytelling is important. I mean, I know I've heard Indigenous authors talk about how, the truth about stories is that's all we are, right? And I remember like a famous Indigenous chief, I can't remember who it was, but I remember the words said to the settlers. He said, if this is your land, where are your stories? And so I mean, it's so important. I mean, I know I mean I couldn't understand everything you were saying when you were speaking in Cree, but I of course I heard with Sagachaki, we can only talk about him when the snow is on the ground. We can only say his name, and I heard, of course, the Chimwin, and so I wondered if you could talk about like the different kinds of stories and a Chimwin, what that word really means, and then in terms of the sacred stories, the kind of the difference between the two. And
yeah, well, there's 7 types of stories actually, but I'll just talk about 2 of them. And one of the sacred stories we talk about is called Atayokewina in Plains dialect, Atayokewina. In TH Cree, that'll be Atsalokewina. Well, these are the sacred stories that are told in the wintertime. And they're stories that deal, that have Wisakichak and Witigo and Ayas, and Bakak, all those other characters in here. There's Atsalokewina. Then we have the other stories called Achimoina. Achimoina can also refer to news stories. These stories you could tell in the summertime. There's news stories, events of historical significance and stuff. Achimoina, ordinary stories, historical stories, all that kind of stuff. So there's these things. You could tell these stories in the summertime, summer gatherings. And but the main stories were the Atayokewina, and these are so neat. And these are the stories. You get so many different versions of these stories. And I don't know, like there's a book, hang on, there's a book called Atsalokewina and Achimoina by Robert Brightman. And this is so neat. The unfortunate thing is, it is all in English. It's a wonderful treasure because it gives you various versions of the same story told by different people. What's happening in Indian country, in Cree country, is that a lot of people are mixing up their characters. Like to me, Wisakichak is Wisakichak. He's the main character. In other communities, Ayas or Chakapis, that's become Wisakichak. Those 2 characters have taken on Wisakichak's roles. And it's just something that happens in communities, And but in my upbringing, Wisakichak has their own different stories. Ayas has his own different stories, and Chakapis has his own different stories. There's just 3 different characters doing different things in my neck of the woods, and the different nations are mixing these characters up. And Chakapis is the man on the moon, basically. And Ayaz is a wonder that goes through all sorts of neat things. But, you know, you have to listen to these songs, these stories over and over again to be able to get a lesson. And you have to, and you have to look at them more, they are more than just stories to entertain children. Let me tell you a story. I'm going to tell it in English for this radio broadcast. One day, Wissahichak was walking along and he came upon some chickadees sitting on a branch, throwing their eyes up into the air, falling right back into their eye sockets. And Wissahichak says, "Oh, younger siblings, teach me that fabulous trick." And the chickadees look at Wissahichak and say, "No, Wissahichak, you'll only abuse this sacred gift. We're not going to teach you how to do this." So Wissahichak got angry and walked away. And he immediately looked around. Then he disguised himself as an old man. And he goes back limping toward where the birds are. Really, "Oh, my head, my head." You know, just an old man walking toward these birds. "Oh, my head." And the little birds see this guy, see this old man. "Oh, Namuslo, what's wrong? Hey, grandfather, what's wrong?" "Oh, I got such a headache. I don't know what to do. I'm just so tired all the time. I think I have COVID." "I was." And the little birds look at him and say, "Oh, we can help you, old man. We can help you, elder. We can help you take care of that headache. You know, if you take your eyes out and throw them into the air, then your headache will be gone like this. And we're right back in. So you could try it, old man. You can try that, old man." Also, the old man going ahead and took his eyes out and throws them up in the air. And they fall back into the eye socket. And the bird said, "How do you feel now?" "Oh, I'm much better now. Thank you, Nusimak." Remember, Elder, do not use this gift, abuse this gift. It's a sacred gift given to us by the Creator. You can't just use it any old time. "Oh, don't worry, I won't do it. I'll only use it when I need to." And Wissahichak walks away. And as he's away from the birds, he gets back to his usual self and he says, "Oh, I tricked those guys for good. I'm gonna use this gift really good." And he sees he's walking along and he sees Willows and, "Oh, my head, my head." So he takes his eyes out, throws them in the air, and falls back into the socket. "Oh, that is a wonderful gift," he said, and he continues on. And he sees more Willows and he says, "Oh, my head, my head." And he takes his eyes out again and they fall back in. So that's just so good. That is wonderful. Oh boy, I love this gift. This is awesome. And so he goes along, walking along, and he sees more Willows and he says, "Oh, my head, my head." And so he takes his eyes out, throws them up in the air. His eyes fall elsewhere. So he's blind. He's looking for his eyes on the ground and he couldn't find any. He didn't know where they are. Every now and then somebody would poke his eye with a stick. "Oh, my eye, my eye." He keep looking for his eyes, on the ground. He couldn't find them. And another time somebody would poke his other eye. "Oh, my eye, my eye." He keep looking and again somebody pokes him in the eye. "Oh," and he gets a real bad headache. And he keeps looking and again, somebody pokes him in the eye. "Oh, oh, my head." And then he hears a laughter. He hears something and he knows it's a fox. "Oh, just wait, fox, I'll pay you back as soon as I find my eyes." So he looks around and he hits his head on a tree. "Whoa, who are you?" "Oh, I'm a birch tree." "I don't want you." And he's looking around and he hits his head on a tree again. "Who are you?" "Oh, I'm a poplar tree." "I don't want you. It's not the one I want." And so he keeps looking for his eyes and he hits his head again on another tree. "I'm a willow." "I don't want to see you." "Sure." go on. And he keeps looking blindly and rams his head against another tree. Who are you? I'm a pine tree. Ah, you're the one I want, which is great. Thank you. And so he takes some pine pitch off the pine, rolls it into it, softens it up and rolls it into balls and puts one into his eyeball and does another one with another thing, and it rolls it up into a little round ball, puts it in the eye, and he's able to see again. So right away, he goes looking for the fox. He's walking along the forest when he sees a fox sleeping over by the trees, and he thinks, I don't want to kill him outright, so that won't be any good. I think I'll build a fire around him. So he sets wood all around the fox, and then he builds a fire, and he hollers, "Fox, you're on fire!" And the fox wakes up and looks around, sees the fire all around him, and he jumps up in the air, as foxes do, and jumps over the fire. And he just singes his tail. To this day, you can see the white singe on the fox's tail from there.
Fantastic. I mean, I just feel like I should applaud. Oh, yeah, I love Wissahickachuk stories and
it sounds like a children's story on how the fox got his tail, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of lessons in it too, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons in there, you know. Like one, we have to respect sacred gifts. That's number one lesson. Number two, notice how quickly the birds were willing to help this old man without really knowing who he was. Lesson two, just because somebody's old doesn't mean they're wise and will be respectful of everybody. That's the main lesson of this story. It's really neat. And a lot of people miss that story, you know, because a lot of people think that because somebody's old, they got to be respected. It's just not the case. We have a word for old man, an old woman. Kisiaya, that could be anybody. We have a word for elder, kehteaya, different word. That is an elder. You know, not everybody could be a kehteaya, but anybody could be a kisiaya. You know, so this is one of the lessons that needs to be told in this story. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned in these stories. If we could just bring them out, get people to tell them in Cree or English even. But it's so good to see. You know, I love seeing this storytelling month. It's a good step forward. Like I say, I'd love to see these stories being told as part of the school curriculum. And I'd love to hear them in radio programs and TVs. I think somebody's working on cartoons for these stories as we speak. That's going to be nice to see when that happens. But there's a big interest in stories, in First Nation stories. It's reviving. It's not like it was when I first started university back in 1973, where most of us who were at university, did you know that when I went to university in 1973, there was only about 8 of us First Nations people on the Regina campus?
That's amazing. Yeah.
That's the way it was way back then. It was very, very rare that anybody actually went to university. Anybody of First Nations ancestry went to university. Mm-hmm. It was very rare.
Despite that being a treaty promise.
Yeah. And it is a treaty promise. And before that, before the 70s, anybody who went to university of any First Nations university, anybody of First Nations ancestry who went to university either became a nurse, if you're a woman, or a priest, if you're a man. Those were the only options back then. That's why we had Reverend Henderson, the collector of the newspaper stories. You know, him and a whole bunch of other people became priests. One of my mentors, Dr. Ahab Spence, was a priest from that era. And so it was very rare to find anybody of First Nations ancestry in any other field of employment other than being a nurse or a priest. But that changed around when First Nations gained control of their education. Indian control of Indian education was the catchphrase back in the 70s, where we started taking care of our own education system. And we started with the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural College in Saskatoon. That's what it was called then, Cultural College. Cultural Center is called now. And this was the beginning of what First Nations University is now, back in 73, you know. And And the bands, individual First Nations started having control of their own education system. And so it was good to see. But still, here we are in 2022. We still don't see these stories as being part of the curriculum in any school, as far as I can see. They're still just amusing stories to tell the children. But they were our education system. I'd love to see that change. I think I've spoken quite enough.
I mean, we could keep going and then we could have 2 programs.
Oh, yeah, boy. Anyway, so that's just one story, and my opinions of the stories. And I hope I can see some other stories being told. Thank you for asking me to call.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. And I mean, when you said that, like right near the beginning, about how you would love to see like the stories, I mean, that's been my goal with Homelands, with the radio program, you know, that we bring Indigenous people on to tell, you know, whatever stories they want to tell about their lives and what they're doing and what their experience is, you know. So I mean, so that's, you know, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. on CFCR, and it's on the YouTube channel, of course, but yeah, I mean, I would love to see more programming of that kind of quality, where you have, you know, storytellers using, you know, both languages, because I love that, right? Because you get both, and we got to keep not just the stories alive, but the languages alive. So, I mean, yeah.
We have a lot of stories on Cree Literacy Network. It's a blog on Cree Literacy Network, but a lot of my stories are on there in Cree and in English.
Awesome.
And, so if you're looking for stories, just look at them in there.
Oh, that's great. I mean, one thing I loved, of course, about this was, I mean, it's good to read the stories, but I mean, it's so good to have stories told to you, right? When you get to hear the storyteller, because you're a good storyteller, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, you've got the expressions and you know, yeah, it's just to hear a voice, right? Yeah.
I love telling stories. One of the misconceptions of a lot of people have is that you cannot tell stories because you're not a storyteller. That is not true. Any parent is responsible for telling stories. I mean, can you imagine my parents waiting for a storyteller to come to our isolated trapline cabin up in northern Saskatchewan? The storyteller probably in Alberta somewhere. It'll take about 3 years to get to our camp. So rather than waiting for the storyteller to come to our cabin, my mother told the stories. And that's just it. It's a parent's responsibility to tell these stories, you know. And so learn the stories. You may have to do them in English. Well, there's a lot of places you can get the English versions of stories. Like the books I showed you, the PC stories are really great. That's a good start. The Brightman stories are good. The sacred stories of the Sweet Grass Tree are good. You know, they're all in English except for the sacred stories of the Sweet Grass Tree. That's in Cree and in English. So that's a good start if you're a parent and you want to tell stories. Of course, kids love pictures, right? And that's why this book right here is good. These pixies at the sacred stories. Yes, we have pictures.
Oh, beautiful.
You know, there's beautiful pictures here made by Aleha Achikute, and she did the paintings in this book. And the children love stories with pictures. And this is one good picture that you can have. I'm trying to find a wonderful picture here that I just absolutely adore. You know, so books are available.
Oh, that is beautiful. The bison with the flowers. And I have seen a Christy Belcourt
really
picture of like that too. That's
you know, so the material is there. It's available in any library. I'm a fan of libraries, by the way, as you can tell.
Me as well. Me as well. That was my storytelling growing up. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm looking for horses here. Beautiful story.
Oh wow. What story is the horse? Are the horses in? So that Mr. Tim.
The baby from the Pixies, the first horses. It's called the first horses in the Pixies, and And the first horses are there. And it's in Cree and in English. So one side of the page we have Cree, and on the other side of the page it's the English. So the resources are there. And so it's looking good. Like when I went to university back in 1973, there was hardly anything that you could look at. You know, 1973, what Indigenous author was around?
Yeah. Yep.
Maria Campbell, of course.
Yeah.
She published Half-Breed back then. Yeah. Back in it first came out in 1973. It was a big thing for us, you know. Oh, great! A Métis person publishing autobiographies. It's great, you know. But prior to that, there's very few people actually doing any writing. Very few First Nations people actually doing any writing.
Yeah, she broke a lot of trail for everyone. Yeah.
She sure did. That's so neat. And nowadays we have lots and lots and lots of writers out there, and I love it. And people ask me to do stories, to do storytelling, and other people have done other stories. And like this was rare to see. This is Cree is who I am, truly. This is a Sarah Whitecap story book. And it's in Cree and in English, the autobiography.
I haven't seen that book before. I would love to read that.
You know, so there's lots and lots of publishing going on. And just recently, my colleagues put out a book today. Just recently put out a book, which is really wonderful. This is brand new.
Oh, Mary Louise Rock Thunder. I come from a long time back.
Yeah, and I proofread this a couple of summers ago, and it's finally available. And this is in Cree and in English, telling you about the history of people. And so, you know, like, we've come a long way in publishing. Since 1973. Nowadays, we have access to a lot of books that can be done. And some of these people tell sacred stories during their reminiscences. And it's really great like this. And so I'm excited, you know, like about what's happening in Cree country with new publications coming out. And younger people more interested to writing, you know, and we meet people saying, oh, I don't know, you know, like sometimes we are our own worst enemies, I guess, because Cree was never a written language. We shouldn't be writing Cree. That's so common to hear that, even today. Back the Elders Council at SSCC back in 1970s encouraged us to start writing our Cree language, using standard Roman orthography. And a lot of people don't realize that no language in the world started out as a written language. None.
No, yeah, that's right.
No language like that. You know, that's so those people who say Cree was not a written language, we shouldn't be writing, they have to really take a look at the other world languages. It's just that we're starting to write Cree and we're still very young in our writing right now. Whereas English has been written for since 1400s, you know, but they've had to develop the writing system throughout history. Chinese have been writing since way back when, but they had to start writing the writing system. Each nation in the world, it had to develop their own writing system for their own purposes. You know, like a lot of stories contain history of the people, which is really nice. I love that about language.
Yeah, it contains everything. It contains worldview. It contains the spirit of the people, and it comes from the land, right? The Cree language comes from the land.
Yeah, it does. It comes out of the land, and it's just so neat. There's a story of the rolling head, where Wissahichek's origin. It's called the rolling head. And there's two boys running away from this rolling head who had been their mother at one time. And they're trying to escape from this rolling head. But the father had prepared the boys for their flight. And the father had given them 4 talisman to work with. And one was an awl. Scotchick was an awl. When the boys put that behind them, a forest of thorn trees sprung up and stopped the rolling head from reaching them. And then, but eventually the rolling head went through. And another thing that the boy so he chased the boys again. And the next thing the older boy picked was a flint, appet, threw that behind him, and immediately mountains sprang up. You know, and stopped the rolling head again. This is just an outline of these stories, Phil. This is really, but the rolling head managed to get through. And once again, he sees the older boy sees the rolling head coming closer, so he picks up another gift and throws it back. And this time, that gift is a fungus, chaka, basically, or busagan. And immediately, fire springs up, stopping the rolling head. But the rolling head goes right through the flame and burns all his hair off, and so it comes closer and closer to the boys. And the boy is so tired by this time, you know, it's getting closer. So he picks up the last gift, which is a beaver tooth, but he drops it in front of him, you know. So immediately a river sprang up, blocking him. He gets away anyway, but I won't tell you how he gets away. But the main point of I'm making this here is that basically these 4 gifts give us our 4 elements. We have the air from the cactus, from the thorn trees, giving us the air that we breathe from the awl. And then we have the fire with the apple, we have the rocks and earth from the flint. We have rock and earth there, another element. And then we have the fire, which is another element. And then we have the river. We have the water as another element. There's 4 elements here. And the flight itself goes from east to the southwest, where the cactus are, thorn trees, and then up north and across the Rocky Mountains into the Great Plains and back into the Great Lakes region to cross the Mississippi. We've always been here.
Geography.
Our rolling head story tells us this, that we've always been here. It's a long story, so I won't be able to tell it, but I gave you headlines for that. But the point is, you know, these stories tell us how we are connected to the land.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the stories of the land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They come from the land and they tell stories about stories.
Well, you should hear the Aya story. Now that's something. But I won't tell that. Okay, thank you very much for asking me to join you on the program.
Oh, yeah. And ask one.
Hey, can I ask you what you thought? There's a good greeting, parting phrase. That's it for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can even shorten it to pita. Yeah. Good.
Anchi ho ho ho. So Kishi Marcy to our relative tonight. Solomon Ratt and Niwag Maganaka, all my relations, and believe me, we are all related. So act like you've got relations. This is Auntie Andy signing out from Homelands, originally produced on CFCR Community Radio 90.5 FM in Saskatoon, Homelands of the Métis and Treaty 6 territories, CFCR.ca. You can follow us on Twitter at Métis Homelands, email métishomelands@gmail.com, view this on our YouTube channel, Homelands. Subscribe today, share, and get out and tell those stories and listen to those stories. Marcy, thank you for listening. And Akoshi Kawapa Matina Walmina. That's all. We'll see you later.
Hey.
Hey.